Hello, I'm Maddie Harvey, a knitwear designer and knitting teacher who loves helping knitters develop their creativity and their confidence. This is a video tutorial to show you how to make the most of your yarn when you're knitting a shawl and make sure that you can work out how many extra rows you can knit and how much yarn you're going to use for your cast off. I hope you find it useful. If you have, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can find out more about me and what I do over on my website, which is maddieharveydesigns.com. So this little pair of jewellery scales is probably one of the best things I've ever bought that wasn't knitting needles or knitting or wool or yarn to help with my knitting. So they are, you can't weigh really heavy things on these because they are supposed to be for weighing things for jewellery making. So, but they are very good for weighing in really small amounts. So I bought these, I think, from Amazon quite a few years ago. They were definitely less than £10. I don't know if they are, if Smart Weigh is the company name that make them, but I think if you just did a search for jewellery scales, you'd find some. So you can see here, I've got this in grams. You can see that it does, 0.00. So you can get really accurate measurements of how much yarn you've got left. Because I find kitchen scales are not quite as accurate, and sometimes when you're knitting rows of a shawl, it can come down to 0.5 of a gram. So these are great because they're really accurate. So that is one of my kind of top things that I would say that's definitely worth getting hold of. And when I was running my in-person knit nights, every week somebody would ask to borrow these scales so they could weigh their yarn. So yeah, if you don't have a pair, I would seriously recommend getting some. So I wanted to show you about working out whether you can do extra rows on your shawl. So this is a new pattern of mine. If you're watching this soon after the video's gone up, this is called the Only Connect shawl. So at the end here I've got garter stitch, and I've worked the final repeat of the pattern, and then I've done some extra rows as the edging here. So before I got to the edging, I wanted to work out how many more rows I could do to see if I could fit in another repeat of the stocking stitch section before I did the garter stitch edging. Okay, and I can see now I've knitted it up. This is what I had left. I definitely didn't have enough yarn to do that, but sometimes it can be really hard to tell. So so what I did was, when I was getting towards the point where I thought I need to check, I'm getting near the end of the shawl, I can see my yarn is going down quite quickly. What I did was, I think I used this bluey yarn. I weighed it before I knitted the next row. So if let's just for example say I weighed it and it weighed 15 grams. Okay, then I knitted one row and I weighed it again, and it was 13.5 grams, for example. Okay, so I know if I take the smaller number away from the bigger number, I know that one row used 1.5 grams. Okay, and I can use that information to work out how many more rows I can work. So for this shawl, the sort of repeat is 4 rows worth. So I know that for 4 rows, I'll need 6 grams, so 4 times 1.5. But because I'm using 2 colours, I'm doing 2 rows in the purple and 2 rows in the grey, I know that each colour, I'll need 3 grams of each colour. So that's just something else to think about when you're trying to work out how many more rows you can do. The other thing to think about is just to remember, if you're working, the other thing to think about is if you're working a shawl where you've got increases every so often. Obviously, every time you work an increase, you're going to be using more yarn because you've got more stitches. So although I know one row at the point where I measured was using 1.5 grams of yarn, as I get further on, I will be using more yarn each row. I mean, it might only be 0.1 of a gram, but it's still going to be using more each time, and that all adds up. So just bear that in mind. And then also you want to maybe just keep weighing as you go, just to check. And then for casting off usually, if you're just doing a sort of regular kind of cast off, you usually say 3 times the amount for one row. So here 1.5 times 3, which will be 4.5 grams. Okay, and when I weighed my yarn, this cast off here is a 2-colour cast off, so I'm using both yarns alternating. So what I did was I weighed them both together. So I think together, just to give you an example, together they were 7.4 grams. And then after I cast off, I had 4.5 grams left. So that means that I used 2.9 grams to cast off. So roughly 3 grams. So my estimate of 4.5 was maybe slightly over, but what you don't want to do is run out of yarn in your cast off. So I would think it's better to kind of be a bit more generous with this amount, and have a little bit left over. Now, if you have a fancy edge, if you have a picot edge or maybe knitted on triangles or something, what I would suggest you do is that you actually start a bit of that cast off. So you maybe knit a few picots, so weigh your yarn first, knit a few picots, and then weigh your yarn again, and just do that subtraction. Take the smaller number away from the bigger number, and it'll tell you how much yarn is used for however many picots. So if you did 5 picots, how much yarn is used for 5, and then you need to look at your pattern and work out how many picots are going to be worked along the whole edge. And then you should be able to work out how much yarn you need for the cast off. But just remember to give yourself a bit of leeway by a couple of grams. And if you're doing some kind of knitted on triangles, again, I would weigh your yarn, knit 1, and then work out how much yarn that used by subtracting, and then work out how many triangles are going to be along the whole edge. So look at the final stitch count and divide it by the number that's used in one triangle. So if one triangle uses up 6 stitches along the cast off edge of your sort of live stitches, you might take 6 stitches to work one triangle. If you then divide your final stitch count by 6, that will tell you how many triangles you need, and then you can multiply that figure that you worked out before by the number of triangles, and that will tell you how much yarn you need to finish off. So it's just a little bit of maths, but the weighing scales, you know, if you want to really make the most of your lovely hand-dyed yarn, weighing scales are the way to go. I hope you found that useful. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Thursday for another tutorial.